My name is Sean Bertrand. I'm the Senior Vice President of our Security Programs team at CBI. I run two divisions here, our Digital Forensics and Incident Response team, in addition to our Penetration Testing team. If you see me take a lot of sips of coffee, it's as a result of the Digital Forensics team. If anybody was involved in the Exchange Hafnium vulnerabilities, you know where we're at. But this is an exciting time for us today to talk through the report. So now it's my honor, first of all, to be on this panel with two great minds, Jedi Knights that I respect profoundly, Dan and Eric. Would you guys mind yourself giving a quick introduction? And Dan, you can go first.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks for that very gracious introduction, by the way. I'm also honored by the company. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'm Dan Gregory, and I am the VP of Systems Engineering here at CBI. And again, thanks to everybody for attending. It's going to be fun.
Thank you, Dan. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Sean. Eric Willey, so Chief Information Security Officer for American Axle. So I've been over at American Axle for a month now, spent the last 14 years at Penske Automotive Group and building and kind of scaling the information security program here, and excited to join the panel and in the discussion ahead.
It's great. I know all of us in the security industry anxiously await springtime for these threat intelligence report, right? They're gold. They can help us with some really immediate short-term opportunities, as well as some more strategic long-term focus and improvement opportunities. So Eric, I've got a question for you. As the CISO of a global organization and the largest tier one supplier to the automotive industry, how do these reports affect you and impact your priorities for either short-term IT security road mapping, or was there anything that jumped out and surprised you?
Yeah, I think the word that comes to mind for me is credence, right? It gives credence to the direction that we're heading in, or it gives us an opportunity to kind of recalibrate and set a new course, right? So if we think about kind of looking at the strategy, the roadmap that we've laid out, that if it maps well to the intelligence that we're getting, I think it just gives us another talking point as we're talking to the board, to executives, to say, hey, we're moving in this direction. And it's not just me that sees it this way. Look, we've got this report from CrowdStrike that is one of the leaders in this space and kind of tracking adversaries and what to look forward to in the industry, and it maps well. And if it's not in alignment, I think it really gives us an opportunity to recalibrate and save face at the same time that, hey, this was the direction we were heading in. We got a threat intel report that says this is really some of the focus areas, and it helps us kind of prioritize and realign where we should be heading. And the one thing that I really like, so from a surprise standpoint, I don't think anything in the report really surprised me. But one of the things that I really love that they called out is a line: if you can't see it, you can't protect it. And that is such a huge element that has to be present in security programs. And anybody who knows me knows that I love the CIS top 20, and that maps back perfectly to the top two things from a hardware inventory and a software inventory. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know what's in your environment, you cannot say that your controls are uniformly deployed everywhere. And that's got to be present. And I think that shows throughout the whole CrowdStrike report that those elements that you can't see, you don't have visibility into, are the elements that e-criminals, that nation states will find and quickly execute on and create kind of open holes within your environment.
That was a great recap. I like, we often take a very tactical lens when we look at these reports, but I think you focus on a few strategic items. I like the cadence in building stakeholder support. I think that's a very important element, that beyond these very tactical things we need to do, we can now, with evidence and probability, better prepare, align our stakeholders to what might be coming. And I love the perspective of can't see it, can't protect it. I think that's going to be a kind of a recurring theme here through our discussion here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was reminded of one thing real quick, Eric. If you can't see, you can't protect it. In my mind, as I read through the report, our networks are no longer in the bubble, so to speak, and our edges are gone, and there's a lot of B2B and B2C. So things we can't see, such as suppliers that are not really always visible to us, but they are very much a part of our network, and their networks assets are now connected to our environment. So it actually extends the scope, I think, of controls number 1 and 2 and some of the others as well. So being a huge fan of CIS as well, I think that really is applicable to that as well.
Right. And that, to add on, I think it also helps set the tone for what adversaries we should actually be concerned about. It's
Yeah.
very easy to get caught up in some of the news headlines, nation state, 0 days and all of that. And I remember having a conversation with an executive months ago that kind of an honest moment of, hey, we're just not that important. If you think about some of the nation states, and this sets the tone on what they're actually after, let's be honest, as you think about some of the 0 days are highly lucrative that are used on specific industries because they have high return on pulling the trigger on them, right? So it helps align what should we be worried about, who is the actual adversary that's knocking on our door.
Yeah.
And that's going to segue to a good conversation later that we have on big game hunting, right? All right, so next topic of conversation here is the effect of COVID on cybersecurity. What threat intelligence debrief would not include the effect of COVID-19 on cybersecurity? I feel like we've all been beaten over the head with a baseball bat on the effect of COVID-19 on cybersecurity. But let's just recap what we saw. I think it's important. First of all, obviously, no surprise, a huge increase in the phishing emails and the pretext used to capitalize on that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Saw emails coming from the CDC, things about the virus propagation, safety, vaccines, you name it. The bad guys will capitalize on that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They also, like what Winston Churchill said, they don't let a good, travesty or disaster go to waste. They capitalize on that, right? So that was one easy win there that we identified. Another thing is remote access security. We saw a huge shift of people working from home, and that introduced a significant amount of vulnerabilities for a lot of environments. Everything from authentication to VPNs to even just some of the trivial aspects related with endpoint security. We've got all these people on laptops now working from home. Do we have, endpoint security and even traditional firewalls on there? Some of the attacks that we saw, kind of what's old is what's new again, forced authentication attacks and things that capitalize on those weaknesses of the remote access security models that we have was a challenge. We again saw increase in healthcare related attacks, right? Ransomware aimed at that very intrusive and critical healthcare environment. They understood the position that they were in. The bad guys obviously do what they can to capitalize on it as well. And I think overall, one of the things that we really witnessed, and I think I feel like I'm going to look back 5 or 10 years from now and really look at this as a milestone moment, the accelerated digital transformation to the cloud, right?
Yes.
We saw organizations, large and small, having to move applications out to the cloud and just do this in order to keep the business functioning.
Yep.
And with that, it introduced vulnerabilities with cloud security, application security, and also for me, it was almost, I feel like, a hands-on view of this evolution of the network. Simply put, the local area network, the LAN, it just ain't what it used to be. It is changing in such a dramatic fashion. It's very interesting. Any comments on that, Dan or Eric?
I've got a few. To echo what you said, I believe adversity breeds creativity. And in times like the pandemic, we were forced to do things that we had talked about, looked great on paper, and we were slowly edging towards, but it forced us as an IT security community and all the organizations to get very creative in a short amount of time. So there's actually a positive or a silver lining here, as you're getting at. Necessity is the mother of invention is the other thing. Is, hey, we had to do this, so we created better ways to do it in a short amount of time. Now, security is catching up very quickly because we just had to throw things together and, wing it for a bit, but it's starting to get way better. I think we're now years ahead of where we would have been had the pandemic not happened in certain things like digital transformation, services-oriented networking, and things like that. So you can't really learn something and how good you're at until you're really tested. And last year was a huge test. And it's good to see that we're moving the ball forward on certain things where normally I think we would have had another year or two to wait. So that's a silver lining for me. I'm an optimist. So
yeah, no, and I'm right there with you. I think the key term was acceleration, right?
Yeah.
As we look at a lot of the programs that we were building over time, that I think most, if not all of us, were moving to the idea that, all right, we're not as concerned now with the physical walls that we have around our locations, and we're shifting those boundaries, and we're gonna center more on identity. And we're going to center on identity and understanding behavior patterns, how people are operating, the tools they're using in the environment, when they're coming into the environment. And that really becomes our new kind of operating model. But certainly, I think COVID took that path that we were all on and just sped it up immediately. And all of a sudden, we were in a rush to start executing and finishing off some of those plans. And certainly, a lot of that centered around the move to the cloud. Because if you look at it, we need to be in a position that all of our architectures had to be highly scalable, had to be highly available to continue to operating in this model with this kind of instant move to work from home. So it certainly accelerated some of the plans that we had there.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Good conversation on the effect of COVID on cybersecurity. So with that out of the way, let's dive into big game hunting. All right. So big game hunting. Let's talk a little bit about like ransomware campaigns. You know, ransomware campaigns aimed at high value targets dominated the ecosystem of e-crime enablers in 2020. And what we observed is this shift from groups that used to target these focused point of sale devices to hacking into big game hunting, you know, going after the whales of the environment. And for those of us that have been around a while, remember when, you know, it was basically point of sale devices was like the main thing they were going at. And it's interesting to see how quickly things shift in this industry and why it's so important we use these reports to give us that advantage. So, you know, let's talk through a little bit about what companies would be considered targets for big game hunting type attacks. You know, I think while many enterprise organizations certainly fit the target profile, I think there's smaller SMB organizations, you know, that might be aligned more with, you know, investments or financials, and obviously manufacturing firms as well. So Dan or Eric, you know, do you guys think that big game hunters are going to focus on SMB style or enterprise or a little mix of both?
First of all, I love the term. I think that was a great name. Yeah, that was really well done. Hats off to CrowdStrike. Not that they've had any challenges in naming different adversaries in the past.
They're good at names.
Right. I think you're spot on, Sean. I think as we look at that ecosystem, as we look at the attackers and what they're after, you know, the term, I don't want to call them lazy, but let's be honest, they want quick wins. They're going to go after the low-hanging fruit. It's almost the bear mentality, right? Running from the bear. You don't have to be the fastest. You just don't have to you can't be the slowest, right? And it's the same thing that I think that it's like the call it the Eye of Sauron, right? It's going to continue to pivot wherever they get the quickest return for buck. And if they can knock off some of the SMB space, and I know there's a lot of security practitioners that are really getting that space to help the SMBs, but that there is a problem at that level because you have a lot of companies that don't have the money to hire dedicated security staff or the money to hire an outside firm. And that's certainly going to be some low-hanging fruit that I think attackers or big game hunters in this case are going to go after.
Opportunistic. Yeah,
absolutely.
You see these extortion based attacks, they're going to continue to increase in the sophistication and intrusiveness. I think when we talk about recommendations, you know, Eric, when you mentioned can't see it, can't protect it, I agree. You know, when you look at initial access, lateral movement, privilege escalation, the TTPs that these adversaries are using in a relatively prescriptive fashion, given that opportunistic point of view, we're only going to see increases in these attacks. And one prediction I have, I think we have maybe is, you know, I think you're going to see some of the things that were old become new again. I think you're going to see some of these extortion based attacks, you know, move into the denial of service perspective again, right? You know, remember those days, what, 5-10 years ago when that was the main thing when we talked about ransom and extortion based attacks. But I think there's a huge opportunity to see some of these old school denial of service attacks start to take shape. And it was highlighted in the GTR report as well.
Yep. Couldn't agree with you more, Sean. What's old is new again is a theme that's going to repeat throughout our entire lives and probably for generations to come. And another example is legacy OS. It's sitting around. It's there. They're going after that again. It's low hanging fruit, and it's always going to be part of the ecosystem. But to go back to the big game hunter thing, I'll just throw my 2 cents real quick. Is if you want to go after big game, sometimes the biggest creature has a weak spot, and usually the weak spot is if you want to go after something really large, maybe go after the weaker animals in the herd, and that is the supply chain, or poison the well from which they drink, which is, again, their supply chain, and get to them indirectly and slowly start chipping away at that big game that you want to go after. Sometimes it's not always a direct approach, and in most cases, I think we're seeing it's going to be that indirect third-party supplier or backdoor that you didn't know you had, or legacy operating system, or what's old is new again type of in creative attacks. Say what you will about the bad guys. They have an outrageous amount of creativity and imagination. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to add to that, I think it's amazing looking at that marketplace that they all play in as well. You know, I think we've all known this over time, that you've got different players that are selling tools, techniques, and stuff. And then I think the diagram that was in the report that starts to connect all of the different players and how they all integrate with each other is absolutely amazing. So I sent this report internally to our team, and one of the call outs that I had in there is that we've got to continue to stay focused on that we're moving away from this adage in Hollywood that it's a hacker in a hoodie in a basement banging away at a keyboard. Now that might still exist. You know, I still like to wear a hoodie, and I might work from the basement every once in a while. But by and large, this is a huge ecosystem of these players, and the support around it has always amazed me, that the support out of some of these tools and what they're doing is better than that of some of the big box retailers we buy software from.
Agreed.
It's astonishing what they
really
put together. And you talked, Dan, about the kind of the going after kind of bigger animals and stuff like that, that you have groups now that are just set up that, hey, I'm just going to break in. I don't really want to do anything past that. And then I'll sell you as a target off to somebody else that wants to use that hook to go further into the company. It's crazy.
The whole industry.
The whole industry. Yeah, and I think a good transition to the supply chain. And so, Dan, I think you have over to you, Dan.
Thanks for setting me up so good on this one, guys. Nice transition. So the supply chain attacks that we've been talking about, right? And this is a great example of one here that was in the news recently. And as you can see, the timeline here kind of spans about 7 months from beginning to end, right? So from the first time that certain things were reported, now we didn't know at the time, this is one of those retrospective things where you go back and say, okay, it happened around September 2019 is when SolarWinds first started reporting the initial test modifications of the Orion code. And you can see kind of how it progresses from there, okay? A domain was registered for it. It resolved to an IP address shortly after that. SSL certs were generated for it. The compilation of the actual bad code, so to speak, was detected back around March 24th. And then finally, we got this first known kind of malicious distribution of the code. And then shortly after that, everything started kind of falling apart, where we were taking advantage of a supplier's product. So this really ties back to the themes we were talking about, is if you want to go after one animal in the herd, a big game, and hunt them, that's fine. But wouldn't you rather go in there with a machine gun and take down, 20 or 30 of the big game in that same herd? So they're trying to be lazy. Like Eric said, they're always going to take the path of least resistance and be lazy. We call it working smarter, not harder. It's just a thing that's breeding these kind of things, right? So SolarWinds has been around for decades. I was a customer of it a long time ago, 25 plus years ago. So it's in a lot of places. They took advantage of a specific exploit or weakness in it, and it was pretty devastating, actually. And it woke us up to a lot of things. I almost said the cool thing about it was, but it's very ingenious, okay? And then get back to the creativity that Eric and I and Sean were just talking about, is these things are actually just as good in certain tasks as off-the-shelf software you would purchase. So they can collect information, detailed information with this exploit about hosts in your environment. They can enumerate the services running on them, give them detailed information on the hardware makeup, the software configuration. Then they can start to actually beak it out to these kind of arbitrary looking URLs out on the internet saying, hey, I'm alive, I'm well, I'm doing okay, and I'm doing the job for which you programmed me to do. And here's a little bit of information, okay? And they can start deleting files and executing certain things that are fed down to it, including modifying registry keys and all sorts of really nasty things. You would think that I was actually trying to sell a product that did that. I mean, those are products you would purchase to have those capabilities. But in this case, they created their own mousetrap. And they can actually reboot systems and so on and so forth. And when it's ready, the other component, the stellar particle component of it, if you're kind of following this in the news, is to verify whether or not that host is valuable. Okay, they actually examine this and they say, no, that one's garbage. We don't care about that machine. That's just connected to a printer. This one over here happens to be a very valuable machine and asset because of all the data we were able to exfiltrate. So all this leading up to a question that I'm going to actually pose to you, Eric, is as you kind of go through the report, and you look at some of the statistics that are highlighted in other areas, what kind of protections are you thinking about now? Being largest tier 1 supplier to the automotive industry, this got to be a concern. Where's your mind at on this for 2021 and 2022 planning to protect against these types of infiltrations?
Yeah, I'll take that in two different directions, and from a supply chain. So one from the material side and one from the software side, right? Certainly from the material side, you have components going in to build things. Now, for us, that means we, in a lot of cases, are our own supplier. We supply stuff to the driveline side. So if you think about it, and what we're protecting on the kind of the metal forming side is a huge element, because if something happens there, there's a domino effect down the chain that could take out multiple components. So that's a huge thing. And then as we think about kind of third-party suppliers, I think the focus for us, and this is going to be a major one this year, is facilitating kind of a conversation around shared transparency. Getting into, as you talk about the SMB space and that being a target, you've got downstream suppliers, and this goes for on the materials and the software side, that are kind of in that SMB space, right? That they're not going to have as sophisticated as security teams. So I think we're working on having a conversation with them on, hey, if something happens, we don't want this to be kind of a punitive conversation. It's more transparency and how can we help, right? How can you bring us in earlier to help you either declare that you have an issue or rectify it in short order? And then on the software side of it, I think that the focus for us, and SolarWinds really called attention to this, and a lot of us already had this mentality, but anything can be a weapon, right? And we have to treat it as such. That there is nothing that is truly trusted within the environment. So you're putting kind of, and it's back to identity, it's putting kind of walls around that and understanding behavior patterns around those software components in the environment, and only giving them access to what they need access to. I mean, let's be honest, the least privileges mantra has been there forever. It's in our code as security practitioners, and we just need to continue to focus on some of those fundamental elements as it comes to some of those software packages we've got in the environment.
Those are great points. I love what you said about anything can be a weapon. We'll touch on that later on near the Q&A, but Sean, I know you probably got some thoughts on this as well.
No, only that my twin 6-year-old boys also think anything can be a weapon. So
True, very true.
No, we'll touch upon supply chain attacks in a little bit. We'll go into some other details. I think moving on to the next slide to keep us on track and on time here will be good.
Yeah. So let's talk about something a little bit different, perhaps a little bit fun, but the names. So CrowdStrike, we love your artwork. We love your creativity and all the other things you're coming up with. But a lot of questions we get are, where'd the names come from? Like Bear for Russia and Kitten for Iran, which I'm sure they're not too happy about. But what are you guys' thoughts on where the names come from real quick? If you guys have any thoughts on those, or if you indeed know the story behind where the names do come from.
So I do not know the story, but I think as we were joking around, I could understand based on some of these, we may have made some of these countries mad. When you call Iran a kitten, I get it.
I love
it. Maybe lashing out because of it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it is. They've got some relation to the countries with some standard kind
national
of definitions.
Animals. Yep.
Yeah, I want to see more like sloppy sloth or something along those lines. I don't know. Yeah, but I do
know.
agree with Eric.
Right.
You had to tick somebody off in Iran when you called them the kitten in ATP.
I was asking Sean though, with the pen testing capabilities and what CBI does, with being such a potent force, I feel like they should be on this chart as well. I mean, Sean, off the cuff, if you had to pick an animal that defines your team, what would you pick?
Oh man, that's a good one. Wolverine, I think, seems kind of applicable, right?
Yeah,
Something Wolverine, wicked
phenomenal.
Wolverine. I don't know. It seems like
I like it.
Michigan oriented a little bit. I don't know, but yeah, there's certainly a little hilarity in some of these naming groups, and good stuff. All right, well, with that out of the way,
I'm going to hand it over to you, Sean.
Yeah, let's talk about the e-crime ecosystem. Some fancy words there. What is this e-crime, you might ask? I think e-crime is simple. It's the monetization effort of malicious adversaries. It's all about the Benjamins right now, right? I remember 10, 20 years ago, it wasn't always about the Benjamins. It was about notoriety, jumping on some IRC channel back in the day and showing what you're able to accomplish, and then teaching them, obviously, how to fix it. Boy, all things have changed. So, when you highlight the significant shift into e-crime. It's interesting when you look at, like, in the last just 2 years, there's been a fourfold increase in the number of interactive intrusions, and this is primarily driven by e-crime. And it's
Mhm.
primarily as an increase in the data extortion methods that we're seeing with these ransomware attacks. It is staggering. CrowdStrike intelligence identified the highest number of ransomware associated data extortion operations this year in the industrial and engineering sector, with roughly about 229, 230 incidents, closely followed up by the manufacturing sector, right, at 228 incidents. And so the manufacturing industry is particularly vulnerable to ransomware operations. And we're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to move forward here in a little bit and talk about the ransomware adversary TTPs and get into that a little bit. But, Dan, Eric, no surprise here, right? As I
No.
said, it's all about the Benjamins right now, where those malicious adversaries are really going to accelerate their pursuit of getting that money in any way they can, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's, I think it really, you got to draw back to what we were establishing earlier, that they are by and large, and I think we use the term lazy, right? That it's what's the quickest path to monetization of what they're doing. So what you do is you start to look at industries that who is going to, lack of a better term, scream the loudest if once I squeeze and can do something that's going to pay up the quickest,
Yep.
right? And that's the thing that I think is so interesting also on the as we start to talk about the ransomware and the shift from, we deploy ransomware and then you're getting companies to pay dollars to get the decryption key, and that was the thing, that was kind of all it was for a while, and then it started to move. Well, now we understand that, all right, most companies aren't going to pay up. The FBI has told us,
Mhm.
hey, don't pay up, and by the way, if you pay to certain groups, you might be in bigger trouble. So they start, all right, well, you're not going to pay up. Well, now I'm going to exfiltrate your data. I'm going to put it out there. And,
Mhm.
you bring that back to manufacturing. I think manufacturing, that if you squeeze on it, you have an instant impact. If you
Yeah.
take down a shop floor, that immediately hits the bottom line, which triggers an immediate reaction out of the company. So I'm going to, as an attacker, I'm going to go after the areas that I can get the quickest return on a dollar. And by the way, manufacturing historically, and you guys mentioned it earlier, has had kind of a problem with some outdated operating systems tied to
Mhm.
machinery. It's kind of ripe for the picking.
Yeah.
It is, especially with the impact. We've seen that impact on the front lines of the DFIR side of things, where you've got, the measurable impact in hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour, and in some cases millions of dollars per hour when a certain plant operation goes down. It's interesting. And I also want to kind of talk a little bit through the data leak component. It's something new that we saw in 2020, right? If you're not going to pay us, guess what? We're going to post your stuff out onto a data leak site.
Mhm.
And I'll tell the audience here today, based on our observations, that happens in like 9 out of
Mhm.
10 cases. It's not just a threat. They are. Some of these threat actors have a hall of shame website that you can go to and just pull down all the data that they posted. And so it's certainly something that organizations, I think, need to get ahead of. You need to
Mhm.
have a game plan. Everything from a public relations perspective to a how would we go about analyzing a 20 gig, 1 terabyte dump that goes out on the internet? How would we dig into that and determine what's really a threat? Are there passwords posted out there? Is there intellectual property? Is there
Mhm.
PII? It's a big thing right now, as we see the probability of them doing this. As we start not paying the ransomware as much, this data leak perspective is going to take, I think, a different turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah, and I think, kind of forward looking, I think one of the things that we may see on the ransomware front as well is kind of ransomware as a smokescreen.
Mhm.
And as if you look at drawing attention back to the diagram from all of the attacking groups kind of working together, that if I can get one of the groups, hey, you're going to launch ransomware because I'm going to refocus the security team on that. Don't watch what I'm doing over here and what I'm really after.
Yeah.
And I think that this is going to get far more complex before it gets better.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, just like those old school
Yeah.
denial of service attacks. Look over here while we're doing
Right.
something else, right?
Unfortunately, I agree with you. It's coming.
Yeah, and it's as we're based here in the Midwest, and certainly have got an audience that is either global or North America. The manufacturing world is they're on the front lines. You mentioned some of those disparate legacy based technologies. You see a lack often of segmentation in the environment.
Hmm.
Most of these manufacturing environments we walk into are extremely flat, where that
Yep.
threat can propagate like wildfire, right? So I think as we talk through here and segue a little bit into recommendations, you'll hear about some of these things that we
Yep.
need, better visibility, better control, better segmentation. But Dan, I'll let you kind of dive into a little bit of the recommendations here that we can kind of encompass all together.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sean. So any good presentation like this, guys, it's good. It's nice banter to see us talking back and forth and such, but we want to maybe give you guys some actionable items you can take back and think about and have discussions with your team beyond just what was in the report that we could all read. Hopefully some of these conversations here has sparked a thought or an idea on how it might apply to your environment specifically. So as you read through these, and I'll let you guys kind of let your eye, float across those. I wanted to add a few things that I heard both Sean, you and Eric bouncing back and forth as we went through this. Even though we only talked for a short time here, we covered a lot of ground. So can't see it, can't protect it. Eric's first one was great, fantastic. Remember that. Going through those validation of security controls, I'm talking about number 7 here, not just 1 and 2, but all 20 of the SANS 20 stack, if that's what you follow or whatever you adhere to something, right? We're just saying have a standard and adhere to it and practice it and test it and test it and test it over and over again. That's what number 7 is all about underneath it. Okay, so 7, 8, and 9 are ones we've added to the GTR report. And I'm going through those here more than anything. Practicing transparency with third-party suppliers. I think it was a great comment, Eric, that you made. We're not in this together anymore. There's no bubble. It's one big global connected economy. And the more we share and talk and communicate with those third-party suppliers, I thought Eric made a great suggestion there. Recommendation to be transparent with your suppliers and not adversarial, saying, hey, listen, fix these problems or else we're going to cut you off. We should start really working together because the bad guys certainly are. As you and Sean have already pointed out many times, they're working together and coordinating their attacks. We have to do the same. Anything could be a weapon. I love that one. Remember that, test it, question it, and apply those zero trust or least privilege principles that Eric mentioned as well. I thought that was a great takeaway. And then finally, Sean, one you just mentioned is the monetization of the entire system. Where there's money, there's usually corruption eventually. Some hobbies turn into this innocent, hey, look what I did. I broke into somebody and I got a badge of honor, to like, oh, I can make money at this. Oh, that's a completely different story. Hang on, hold my beer for a minute. I'm going to go and amp this thing up to turn it up to 11. And I'm really going to see what I can do with my friends. So those are my additional things to recommendations that I heard from you guys. Anything you guys want to add on to that pile there for our audience to take back as some actionable discussion points?
Got a couple. Tactically, and I might be stealing some of Eric's thunder here. He mentioned the opportunistic based attacks, right? I think tactically, killing off the low hanging fruit in your environment is one of the best things you can do. And I know it's easier said than done. The example I would make is like on the outside, credential-based attacks are still going to persist. Everything on your external perimeter should be multi-factor 2FA'd. Everything. If there's one application or one VPN that allows that access without 2FA, it can be game over. I also think we need to look at threat modeling in a more efficient point of view or more efficient lens. Many organizations are trying to boil the ocean. You're like, where do I start? You look at the MITRE attack framework and it's got like 300 different attacks. Are all of those applicable to you? No, probably not. Go through some threat modeling exercises, understand the simplistic point of view of who is the attacker coming after me? What would they be going after? And what techniques and tactics would they use to get there? You can then focus your efforts a lot more effectively in your controls, your countermeasures, your posture, all of those different things, I think are important overall. So, Eric, anything else to add there?
Yeah, the only other thing that kind of came to mind is kind of an overarching theme of challenge your mindset. I think as we look forward and think of focusing on some of the more traditional security alerts that are coming out and what we're focused on responding to, I think we've got to expand that and start looking into non-traditional events as potential early indicators of a cyber issue, right? So I think I'll draw attention back to kind of the manufacturing side, right? As all of us head towards Industry 4.0, everything becomes interconnected, that we're talking back to machinery now, that as you start to see machinery that is no longer hitting KPIs, that it seems a little bit off.
Okay, now he froze up, but I think Sean, you and I knew where he was headed with that, is looking at the behaviors of a different type of network that you're used to looking at in the OT, IT, IoT space, knowing what those machines are supposed to do and how they're supposed to act, and under what conditions do they actually respond in a certain way with certain latencies and everything else. It's not just IT anymore, right? It's everything, the point of sales, the IoT, the OT, everything. We're seeing our customers becoming more and more responsible for a larger footprint inside their own networks, in addition to the supply chain and everything else we talked about. So the landscape's just grown considerably.
Those non-traditional events, I think, is what he really was trying to drill in on.
Exactly.
Oh, he's back. That was the quickest recovery I've ever seen, by the way. He's still connected
Nicely
to
done,
audio.
sir.
Yeah, not
Nicely
bad.
done.
Yeah. So just as I'm saying that anything could be a cyber issue, crazy.
Good demonstration, Eric. Good demonstration.
Yeah. But no, I was just saying that as we think about the change in the machinery and everything being interconnected, that maybe a machinery that's throwing codes, maybe it's not that you missed a maintenance schedule, right? Maybe that it's not that it's just based on the workload. Maybe it's an early indicator that somebody's toying with it. And I think we need to start expanding our scope and what we're keying in on, and using kind of non-traditional security indicators as kind of a mindset shift to everything becomes a security incident until the security team says it's not a security incident.
Yeah. And I think more industries, more so than they think, have that problem. So some organizations might be saying, well, I don't really have that OT, IoT thing you're talking about. In most cases, we find that there generally is a footprint of something like that in the environment. I mean, the obvious ones are financial. You get your branch office ATMs and such. You get healthcare. You got bedside care units there, ER/OR equipment. Manufacturing is the poster child for these kind of things. But other industries really need to start taking a harder look at what those other things might be beyond traditional IT, to your point, Eric, and including those behaviors that they exhibit, part of their day-to-day, questioning. Is this normal? Is this normal?
And also understanding whether there's going to be a shift in the different payloads that these adversaries are using. When you look at SolarWinds, right? You look at SolarWinds, one of the inevitable payloads that was dropped down was CrowdStrike, right? CrowdStrike it's not impossible to detect that in your environment. You look at the hafnium vulnerabilities that are going on from the Chinese nation state right now, targeting those 4 exchange vulnerabilities. They're dropping stuff like PowerCat and Mimikatz and some of those things. So as Eric mentioned, combining that different element of analysis with some of those other areas, I think, is a great approach to trying to do the best that you can with what you have, right?
Absolutely. So these are all great observations, guys, and I think, if anything, we're getting the ball rolling a little bit for conversations for everybody to take away. And as always, guys, we always love to have part of those conversations. If you want, you know how to get a hold of us. But I want to kind of move on to some of the questions, because we do have a few or a number of them to get through. If you guys want to, unless you have something else to add to this, we should jump into Q&A.
Let's do it.
All right. Fantastic. First one in. I'll just put this out to anybody who wants to tackle it. Will the increase in threats and attacks result in a different, quote unquote, different type of resource allocation or spend on cybersecurity enhancement? So how's this affecting the way that IT teams are spending time with resources and, I guess, acquisition of technologies?
Yeah, that one, I'm going to answer that with the typical Dan Ayala, it depends. Because so much of that is going to be driven by culture of the company and everything. But I think if we were looking at it on a grander scale, certainly, I think it continually, and I'll drive back to what I opened with on giving credence, right? It gives credence. And I think majority of boards now are asking the right questions. And when the board starts asking the question, it gives the CISO, the executives, the opportunity to give that narrative on what we're up against. And certainly CrowdStrike really helps in providing data to back up that narrative, what we're up against, what it actually means in business terms, dollar cents to the organization. And here's how we can start getting ahead of it. But, I'll continue to draw back. We always need to make sure that we caveat that with never say never, right? That you could have an unlimited checkbook, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get hit at some point.
Yeah, no,
And
I totally agree. Sean?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you see when you talk about the increase in threats and the attacks resulting in any different type of resource allocation, I think much to Eric's point, it does depend, but you're starting to see the stakeholder support, right? This is no longer fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we were trying to pitch 10 years ago, 15
Mhm.
years ago. Everybody from the CFO to the CEO and all the stakeholders to the committee and the board, understand the importance here. So, I think that's an important element that you have. It seems like a little bit more support than what we had for that spend or resource allocation.
Yeah,
Right.
would totally agree with both of you and Sean. For those who don't know, Sean and I worked with each other at Mascotech many, many years ago. And I can tell you, Sean, that in the 25 plus years in my career, it is considerably easier to get the ear of those that you need to report, that you report to get a spend on IT security than it used to be.
Right.
We were always thought of as the department that just spent money, and that's all we did, and there was no direct correlation to business objectives and what we did. Now we're being forced to think about how does this affect the bottom line. And Eric, to your point about culture, how does this either foster or create a security-minded culture, which is actually my kind of way of segmenting into the next question that popped up, which is very appropriate. How can CISOs foster that culture of security to help combat issues highlighted in the report? Any thoughts on that, Eric or Sean?
You want to take that one first, Sean?
No, I'll let you take it if you'd like.
The thing that initially comes to mind is avoid using FUD, right? Fear,
Yeah.
uncertainty, and doubt. And I think Sean mentioned that earlier, that, you take a great report put out by CrowdStrike, it's very easy to go running in, everything's on fire. This is what we're up against. This is what's going to tone it down, right? Put it in business sense, having a level-headed conversation on drawing back to on the strategy, where we're going, and kind of reframing the conversation. Dan, as kind of you mentioned, from instead of just being the department that just, hey, we're just spending money, that's what we do. It's kind of reframing it to earnings retention department, right?
Mhm.
We're here to protect what the company is doing to earn. And I think in a lot of cases, the security team is actually really well poised to be a business enabler and
Mhm.
drive it forward. I mean, as security practitioners, you've got to be well versed in kind of all aspects of the business. So it puts you in a great position to be a servant leader and helping with things that may kind of not be within the security vertical, but you still have a seat at the table to say, hey, how can I help? How can I help move the business forward? So when there is a security concern, that naturally you come to mind for the question to be asked.
Yeah, Eric, I 100% agree with you, and I think the role of from the CIO, CISO, all the way down to IT, the organizations that Sean and I and others at CBI walk into, that you can tell there's that air of a security-minded culture. They're adhering to it. They follow it and they embrace it and they're proud of it. In a lot of cases, there's a little ingredient or common denominator I've noticed in the approach that the executives on the IT side take. We're not IT people, okay? We are, and I started using this phrase a couple of months ago, we are brand protection specialists. It pulls them into the business. We're here to help protect the brand as much as anybody else, sometimes literally, but we're here to protect the IP, the brand, the reputation of our organization through the skills that we know how to apply through IT security. But we're brand protection specialists. And you can feel the difference in organizations that get that approach and those that are not so much aligned with the business. So I think what you just said resonates really well. You got to take a different mental attitude on it.
Right. And a lot of that, it's top down, right? That's
Mhm.
where you have to seek the buy-in.
Yeah.
It's creating the culture of security. It does not belong to the security team. Security belongs to everybody. We've tried to push the narrative that everybody's on the security team, and the best indicator, the best tool that we have are our employees. Nobody knows their job better than they do on day in, day out.
True.
And when you get those subtle changes, that if you can coach them and teach them to bubble those things up, that is better than any technology that we can put in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention too, a wise man who I used to work for, who may be on this call, may not be, taught me how to, years ago, taught me how to better align what it is that we're trying to achieve with the board and with the C levels. And
Mm.
and one way that I was able to do that and have succeeded in doing so throughout is aligning security to the business requirements of the organization,
Yep.
right? And so no longer saying, like you mentioned, Eric, this isn't FUD, but the business has revenue targets, they have a new product release, they have a new M&A. How can we as this extension of the team be a catalyst to ensuring those things, those objectives are met? We wrap security around some of those more business oriented objectives.
Yeah,
Very true.
very true. To anyone, next question. How can companies start using or applying the MITRE ATT&CK framework effectively to build analytics and detect adversarial behaviors? It's a mouthful.
For anybody that knows me knows I love MITRE, but Eric, do you want to go? You can go.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, all
I'll
right,
follow
all
you
right.
this one.
Tattoo, Sean.
Well, I
Show
know.
some-
I always say this. I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, I'd have an attack tattoo of some sort. Listen, I think the attack framework is fantastic. For those that don't know what it is, it's essentially a blueprint of every which way an adversary will go about compromising or infiltrating your environment, from initial access to lateral movement to persistence. It's quite robust. There's a lot going on there, but how companies can start using this is adhering it to the threat model that we spoke about earlier. If we can understand that we have this group of adversaries that are going to be coming after us, and these are the techniques and tactics that they're going to use, we can map that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and we can focus on this rather than this. And I've seen when organizations take that concentrated focus, they are going to increase their detection, they're going to increase their awareness, they're going to increase their control effectiveness, which again is more or less just a conversation on investments, right? And what we also do is we see this attack framework beyond the tactical advantage that it has for security really help to provide some better metrics to the executives, to the stakeholders, understanding where we're making improvement opportunities or areas where we're falling behind on. We can start to better disseminate the ROI of security with the attack framework, and also move our security ball down the field in a major way. So anything else anybody wants to add there?
Yeah, I would say the MITRE framework is also, it serves really well when you can hone in on, like you said, on the elements that matter, because of what the adversaries are using, the techniques. So you now can map that to the MITRE framework, but that creates an opportunity for a tabletop, right? That you can walk through and kind of matrix out for the team as we step through those elements. All right, we're gonna take lateral movement. We're gonna take any of these elements, and can we detect that? Okay, where are we detecting that? What tools are we using? What techniques are we using? And then the next line over is, have we tested that? Do we know? So drawing back to what Dan had up on the recommendations on kind of test and verify. So you can go through as almost a checklist on, can we hit on these items, and do we know that our controls will actually catch them?
Yep. I would add that I think MITRE ATT&CK and all the other kind of semi versions of it that came before that led us to the formal MITRE ATT&CK framework, and I'm sure others that will follow as things evolve and change. 4 or 5 years from now, it'll be another thing that's bigger, better, faster, stronger.
I hope not. Not if I'm getting a MITRE ATT&CK tattoo.
Right, exactly. You might want to reconsider that one. But my point is, it's for those who know me, they know I'm a hiker. I can't take a trip unless I know where I'm starting from. So MITRE ATT&CK gives you that good reference of. It also provides a measurable point in time and level of maturity where you're at in certain things and your capabilities based on the data that it provides you, which is always great. It's good reference. So a month, a year, 2 years from now, you can look back and go, all right, we've moved needles and things have changed. Otherwise, you're literally living Groundhog Day. Every day you wake up, you reinvent the wheels, shake the Etch-a-Sketch, and hope that you're making progress. There's no real way to measure it. So things like MITRE ATT&CK and others give you that great flag to plant, I think, before you can plot a way forward and something to measure back to. Is another good way of looking at MITRE and things like MITRE ATT&CK.
Great stuff. I saw one other question, Dan, in the chat. I don't know if it made its way to the question that I can throw out there real quick. Somebody would like to know, hear our perspective on how often data is leaked anyway, despite payment. So if you pay the ransom, what are the expectations that your data is safe? I say this with a grain of salt. most of the things that we have seen is once you pay the ransom, they're not going to leak your data. We haven't seen much of that.
Mhm.
If they did, they would ruin their integrity. And yes, they have integrity, right? This is an operation that the ransomware threat actors have there. They have to maintain some
Yeah.
level of business ethics in what they do. Like when you pay the ransom, do you get your
Yeah.
files back? Most of the time, like 98% of the
Honor
time,
among
you
thieves.
do, right? There's honor among thieves, most certainly. But don't give it as a guarantee that if you pay that ransom, those bad guys still
Mhm.
have your data. What they might do is go back out on the dark web and try to sell that in some way, shape, or form. Remember, it's all about the
Mhm.
Benjamins.
Absolutely.
Well, that may have been
Yep.
the last question, Dan. Anything
No, I
else?
think that that'll wrap it up.
All
I hand it back
right.
over to you, Sean.
Well, that was great.
Yeah,
That was great. That
It
was
was
like a
fun.
fireside
those are
chat,
always
it
fun.
felt like. Yeah, most certainly. Well, there you have it, folks. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, Dan Gregory and Eric. So, Eric, on behalf of Dan, myself, and the entire CBI crew, we
Thank you.
appreciate your time and the insight you shared with all of us today. I also want to thank everybody on the line, right? Our audience on the phone, on your laptop. Thanks for taking an hour out of your day with us. And we hope you got value out of today's session. Please be on the lookout for an invite that we have coming up for a roundtable on intelligence operationalization. That's a tough one. Operationalization with two of CrowdStrike's threat intel advisors. That's going to be on April 7th. So thanks again for joining, everybody. Have a great day and stay
Bye.
safe out there.
Thanks, everyone.